Okay, so you want to own an airplane graveyard. The fantasy version goes something like this. You've got 1,000 acres of empty desert, maybe an old military airstrip with a cracked runway baking in the sun, and airlines start paying you to park their old jets. The money rolls in, you're sitting on a pile of aluminum and titanium worth billions, and all you had to do was point at some dirt and say, "Park it over there." Sounds passive. It is not passive. There is a version of this business that is extraordinarily lucrative. There is also a version that destroys the people who build it, quietly, slowly, over the course of a decade, because of a structural flaw most outsiders never see coming. The difference between those two versions doesn't live in the desert climate, or the land cost, or the number of planes you store. It lives in something more subtle, whether you understand what you're actually selling. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about an airplane graveyard. You are not in the storage business. You are not in the salvage business. You are not even in the real estate business, though you technically own land. You are in the certification business. You are selling airworthiness. You are selling the legal right for an airline to take a part off a dead plane and put it on a live one, and have that plane cleared to carry 300 people at 37,000 feet. Everything else, the land, the climate, the parking fees, is secondary to that. The moment you understand that, the entire economics of the business shift. Let's talk about what it actually costs to build one. Then we'll talk about how it makes money, what it costs to run, where the financial trapdoor is, and why even in years when aviation collapses, some graveyard operators get very, very rich. Start with the land. You need desert. Not just any desert. Arid, low humidity, ideally sitting above 1,000 feet of elevation, on a soil base dense enough to park million-pound aircraft without paving every inch of it. The specific type of soil found in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona, called caliche, hardens almost like cement in the heat. That matters enormously, because paved tarmac costs 6 to 10 times more per square foot than packed caliche. The location calculus is not arbitrary. Arizona gets around 300 days of sunshine annually, and humidity hovers in the low double digits. That alone is worth hundreds of millions of dollars in corrosion prevention. You can store a jet in the Sonoran Desert for years and pull it back out in serviceable condition. You try that in Florida, and you're scrapping the thing in half the time. A viable commercial boneyard requires a minimum of 500 to 600 acres to make the economics work. At current land prices in Pinal County, Arizona, which is ground zero for commercial aircraft storage, raw desert land trades somewhere between $3,000 and $8,000 per acre depending on proximity to a runway. A 500-acre parcel runs you roughly $2 to $4 million in land alone. You need a runway, ideally a surplus military strip that can handle wide-body jets, aircraft like Boeing 747s and 777s, weighing close to 800,000 pounds at maximum gross. If you're not buying a former military base that comes with a 10,000-foot runway already built, you're spending $15 to $30 million just to pour one that can take those loads. Infrastructure, fencing, access roads, drainage, utilities adds another $5 to $10 million. That puts your entry cost, before a single airplane lands, somewhere between $25 million on the small end and $60 million for a site capable of handling wide-body jets at scale. And that's before you've touched what you're actually paying for, which is the certification. Here is where the cost curve turns vertical, and most people get a very rude surprise. You cannot legally remove a part from a retired airplane and sell it back into the active fleet without a Federal Aviation Administration Part 145 repair station certificate. This is not a minor paperwork exercise. Part 145 certification requires you to have documented quality control manuals, specific tooling and equipment, a physical facility that meets FAA inspection standards, and, critically, licensed airframe and power plant mechanics on staff to document every single part removal with a full traceability record. The FAA doesn't issue these certificates quickly. Depending on your scope of operation, the review process can run 12 to 24 months. During that time, you have land, staff, and infrastructure costs, but zero revenue from part sales, which are the most lucrative revenue stream this business has. Legal costs for a facility this complex run $200,000 to $500,000 before you open your doors. Environmental impact studies, required under FAA guidelines for any facility that modifies an airport layout plan, can take 3 months at the short end and 3 years at the long end, depending on what archaeologists, biologists, and environmental agencies find in the dirt. The categorical exclusion process that Penal Air Park conducted for Ascent Aviation Services' recent expansion took nearly 3 months just for the documentation review. An environmental impact statement, the more rigorous version triggered by certain facility expansions, takes up to 3 years and costs north of $500,000 to complete. You also need specialized insurance. Aircraft hull storage policies for a facility housing 100 or more planes run $500,000 to $1.5 million annually, depending on the aggregate value of the stored fleet. Premises liability coverage on top of that adds another $200,000 to $400,000 per year. This isn't optional. If a stored 747 falls off its landing gear jacks and takes out 3 other planes on the adjacent stand, you're looking at a 9-figure liability event. So total pre-revenue cost, somewhere between $30 million and $75 million, with 12 to 24 months of regulatory processing standing between you and a single dollar in parts revenue. Most people do not survive this phase. The ones who do are either already in the aviation maintenance business, or they have deep-pocketed institutional capital behind them, willing to fund 18 months of pure burn. Now let's talk about how the money actually comes in. And this is where the business becomes genuinely fascinating, because the revenue structure is layered in a way that most people never see from the outside. Layer 1 is storage fees. This is what most people think the whole business is. An airline needs to park a 737 for 6 months while demand recovers, or while they figure out whether to sell it. You charge them a monthly fee. According to reporting from The Economist, parking a single-aisle plane like a 737 runs about $5,000 per month at a facility like Penal Air Park. A wide-body jet, a 777 or a 787, runs $10,000 per month or more, depending on the aircraft's weight, footprint, and what maintenance monitoring the storage contract requires. At Penal Air Park's capacity of 400 aircraft, with a reasonable mix of single and double-aisle jets, the theoretical storage revenue ceiling is somewhere in the range of $2.5 to $3 million per month, or $30 to $36 million annually just from parking fees. That sounds like a lot. It is not the hard part. Layer 2 is what the industry calls preservation maintenance. A stored aircraft is not a parked car. Aviation regulations require that even a mothballed jet receive regular systems checks to keep it airworthy, or at minimum to prevent its airworthiness certification from lapsing entirely. Engines need to be preserved with a specific nitrogen purge procedure to prevent internal corrosion. Control surfaces have to be cycled. Fuel systems need monitoring. Birds, rodents, and insects have a relentless interest in settling into openings that ground crews must patrol and seal. The Business Insider journalist who visited Penal in 2023 noted that airpark staff perform these checks routinely on every aircraft in active storage status. A basic preservation maintenance contract on a stored single aisle runs $1,000 to $2,500 per month on top of the storage fee. On a wide body, you're looking at $3,000 to $6,000 monthly. Multiply across 200 actively maintained aircraft, and you have another $600,000 to $1.2 million per month in recurring services revenue. Layer 3 is where this business actually lives: part out and reclamation. This is the revenue stream that makes the graveyard economics extraordinary. Here is how it works mechanically. An airline or leasing company decides a plane is no longer economic to operate. They send it to the boneyard. The boneyard operator, armed with their Part 145 certification, disassembles the aircraft systematically, first removing hazardous materials under EPA protocols, then harvesting the high-value components in a specific sequence. And the value concentration here is stunning. A Boeing 747 has approximately 6 million total parts and 170 miles of wiring. The aluminum skeleton of the fuselage itself, once stripped of components, is worth maybe $55,000 in raw scrap. But a single set of landing gear from that same 747, the complex hydraulic assemblies, the actuators, the structural pivot components, can command over $300,000 on the secondary market. Cockpit display screens go for $30,000 each. An auxiliary power unit, the small turbine in the tail that powers the aircraft on the ground, is worth $25,000. avionics, hydraulic control units, passenger oxygen systems, thrust reversers. All of them carry certified resale value that dwarfs the scrap price of the airframe left behind. Here's the structural logic. There are still approximately 400 Boeing 747 freighters flying worldwide as of 2025, according to industry tracking. Those operators need replacement parts. The 747 hasn't been in production since 2023. The supply of serviceable used parts comes entirely from aircraft like the ones sitting in Arizona. So when your Boneyard facility holds the title to a retired 747, you're not holding a depreciating asset. You're holding a parts inventory that the active fleet will pay premium prices to access, and which becomes more valuable as the global supply of donor aircraft shrinks. The same dynamic plays out across every aircraft type. As Boeing and Airbus stop producing older models, the surviving fleet of those types becomes more dependent on used serviceable material from boneyards. A full part out of a Boeing 737-800, a common single-aisle narrow-body, can generate $2 to $5 million in total parts revenue over a 6 to 12-month disassembly process, depending on the condition of components and the current market demand for that aircraft type. A wide-body part-out can generate $8 to $20 million. Industry analysts tracking the used serviceable material market, referenced in Airbus's Global Services Forecast, project the total used parts market at over $52 billion in value between 2024 and 2043. Layer 4 is aircraft conversion and return to service. This is the highest margin activity in the Boneyard ecosystem, and it's the business that serious operators are now investing heavily to capture. Instead of parting out a mid-life cycle aircraft, a Boneyard facility with heavy maintenance capabilities can take a 15 to 20-year-old wide-body passenger jet, convert it to a cargo configuration, and return it to another 2 decades of active service. Ascent Aviation Services, the primary operator at Penal Airpark, signed a long-term agreement with Israel Aerospace Industries in September 2023 to do exactly this for Boeing 777-300ER aircraft, converting passenger jets into freighters at a $55 million facility expansion that broke ground in March 2024. The conversion revenue on a wide-body aircraft runs $15 to $30 million per aircraft. 2 conversion lines running simultaneously is $30 to $60 million in annual revenue potential, at margins that industry insiders describe as substantially better than pure storage. Now let's talk about what it costs every single month just to keep the lights on, regardless of how many planes you store or how many parts you sell. Labor is the anchor. A Part 145 repair station requires licensed airframe and power plant mechanics, who are in what the aviation industry describes as a structural shortage. Experienced A&P mechanics command $35 to $70 per hour depending on specialty and experience. A mid-size boneyard facility employing 300 to 500 technicians, inspectors, and support staff carries a monthly payroll somewhere between $2.5 million and $5 million. Ascent Aviation Services, according to public data, employs between 500 and 1,000 people across its combined Penal and Tucson operations. Utilities in a desert facility of this scale, including power for hangars, compressed air systems for aircraft maintenance, climate-controlled parts storage, and the various specialized equipment needed for aircraft teardown, run $150,000 to $400,000 per month. Environmental compliance is its own cost center. Hazardous materials removal from aircraft, fuel, hydraulic fluid, de-icing liquids, batteries, and certain metals classified as environmental hazards must follow strict EPA protocols. Third-party hazmat removal and disposal runs $5,000 to $15,000 per aircraft processed for end-of-life disassembly. Property taxes on 500 to 1,000 acres in Arizona's Pinal County run approximately $200,000 to $600,000 annually. State and local business taxes on services revenue add another layer. Arizona does levy a transaction privilege tax on services, which affects maintenance revenue streams. For a facility doing $50 million in annual services revenue, this represents a meaningful 5 to 6-figure tax line. total fixed operating costs, before the variable costs of individual aircraft processing, run approximately $3.5 million to $6.5 million per month for a mid-scale operation. This is the steel floor beneath the business. The cost you pay simply to exist, even in a month when no aircraft arrive and no parts ship. Now here is where the trapdoor opens. And this is the thing that makes the airplane graveyard business fundamentally different from what most people assume. The storage revenue, that reliable $5,000 to $10,000 per plane per month, is not really the business. It's the down payment on the relationship. The actual profit lives in the part out and reclamation revenue, which is lumpy, irregular, unpredictable, and entirely dependent on the condition of the specific aircraft you receive. You can model your storage income with high confidence. You cannot model your parts revenue with anywhere near the same precision, because the condition, configuration, and parts compatibility of incoming aircraft varies wildly. But here's the deeper structural risk, the one that took down a real company in this space. It's called title concentration. When a boneyard operator buys an aircraft outright, takes legal title to the plane rather than simply storing it for an airline, they convert a predictable storage fee into a speculative parts inventory bet. They're wagering that the parts harvested from that plane will sell for more than they paid for the aircraft, plus their disassembly costs, plus the capital cost of holding unsold inventory. Sometimes that bet is extremely good. Sometimes, if the market shifts, if a new model enters wide service, and suddenly nobody needs parts for the retired type, it's catastrophic. And there is a deeper mechanism beneath even that. Parts don't just have value, they have certified value. Every part that leaves a boneyard and enters an active aircraft must have what the industry calls traceability, a complete documented maintenance history from the time the part was installed new, through every inspection and repair, to the moment it was removed at the boneyard. If that history is incomplete, if a document is missing, if records are lost in an airline's bankruptcy, if a previous maintenance event wasn't logged correctly, the part loses its certification. It becomes what's called scrap with paperwork. And a part that lost its cert doesn't sell for $300,000. It sells for its weight in aluminum. You've just written off your inventory at 99 cents on the dollar. This is not a hypothetical. This is what happened to Kitty Hawk International. Kitty Hawk International was a Texas-based cargo airline that also operated an aircraft leasing and parts business. By the early 2000s, they were managing a fleet of aging freighters and accumulating parts inventory. When their cargo airline business deteriorated following the 2001 aviation collapse triggered by 9/11, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2000, and then Chapter 7 in 2001. In the Chapter 7 liquidation, their parts inventory, accumulated over years, worth hundreds of millions of dollars on paper, turned out to be far less liquid than their creditors expected. Many parts lacked complete documentation chains. The cargo airline's record-keeping through multiple reconfigurations and financial stresses was inconsistent. Buyers in the secondary parts market discount anything with documentation gaps aggressively. The realized liquidation value on the parts inventory came in well below book value. Creditors who expected to recover 60 to 70 cents on the dollar found themselves looking at recovery rates closer to 30 to 40 cents. The parts were physically intact. They were not worth what the books said they were worth, because certification is not a feature of a part, it is the part. Without the paperwork, you don't have an APU. You have a very heavy piece of metal. Let's run the numbers on what a good year and a bad year look like for a mid-scale commercial boneyard operation. Say, one operating at Pinal scale with 400 aircraft capacity and Part 145 certification. Good year. Revenues, storage fees at 85% capacity, roughly 340 aircraft averaging $7,500 per month, gives you $2.5 million monthly or $30.6 million annually. Preservation maintenance on 200 actively maintained aircraft at $3,000 per aircraft monthly adds $7.2 million annually. Part-out revenue on 20 aircraft processed through full disassembly, averaging $4 million per aircraft, generates $80 million. 2 cargo conversion lines at $20 million per conversion add $40 million. Total revenue, approximately $158 million. Operating costs, payroll, utilities, compliance, insurance, taxes, hazmat disposal, Run $65 million annually. Net profit, $93 million. Operating margin, approximately 59%. That is a genuinely excellent business. Bad year. Demand for air travel craters. Airlines pull planes out of storage and back into service faster than expected, as happened in late 2021 and 2022, when post-COVID recovery moved faster than industry models predicted. Your 85% occupancy drops to 55%. Storage fees fall to $1.65 million per month, or $19.8 million for the year. Maintenance contracts drop proportionally to $4.5 million. Part-out slows because airlines are flying their old planes instead of retiring them. You process 8 aircraft at $4 million average, not 20, so parts revenue falls to $32 million. Conversions slow to 1, generating $20 million. Total revenue, $76.3 million. Your operating costs don't fall the same way. Labor, insurance, property taxes, utilities, and your environmental compliance infrastructure are largely fixed. They stay at $60 million. Net profit, $16.3 million. Operating margin, 21%. The difference between those 2 years is $76.7 million. Same facility, same team, same desert. The weather didn't change, the business did. And the really important thing, that bad year still produced positive returns. The facility didn't collapse. The reason is the fixed cost structure was built to survive low occupancy periods because the margin model was never dependent on storage fees alone. The operators who get into trouble are the ones who model their capital investment around the good year scenario, carry debt accordingly, and then hit a 2-year bad stretch without the reserves to survive it. Why do sophisticated investors still pour capital into this space, even knowing all of this? There are 3 reasons, and none of them are obvious from the outside. First, there is a structural demographic certainty driving the business. Every commercial jet ever built will eventually need to be retired. The global fleet is aging. Airbus's own services forecast anticipates that over 17,000 aircraft will be retired in the next 20 years. Each retirement is a revenue event for a certified Boneyard operator. That is not cyclical demand. That is physics. Metal fatigue is not negotiable. Second, the geography is scarce in a way that is almost impossible to replicate. You cannot build a competing facility next to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base and suddenly have the same climate, the same caliche soil, the same FAA clearances, the same proximity to the existing supply chain of mechanics and parts buyers that has accumulated in the Tucson-Phoenix corridor over 80 years. Pinal Air Park's ecosystem, with Ascent Aviation Services holding the anchor tenant position and a web of specialized subcontractors surrounding it, took decades to mature. The desert land itself is not what you're buying. The network is what you're buying. Third, and most subtly, the Boneyard is one of the few businesses in aviation where your most important asset appreciates when the rest of the industry is suffering. When airlines collapse, as Spirit Airlines did at the end of 2024, fleets need to be parked, parted out, and reconfigured. When recessions hit, aircraft retirements accelerate. When supply chain disruptions prevent Boeing from delivering new planes, airlines squeeze life out of older aircraft and need used parts to do it. As one aviation journalist at Key Aero put it bluntly, bad news is good business for airfields of this type. September 11th, the 2008 financial crisis, COVID-19. Each catastrophe sent hundreds of planes to the desert. Each catastrophe was a windfall for the operators who survived to process them. By late March 2020, as air travel collapsed and airlines desperately needed somewhere to park their fleets, Victorville's Southern California Logistics Airport had already taken in roughly 275 airliners, with Southwest Airlines alone parking 50 active 700-700s on its ramp. Pinal Air Park, meanwhile, expanded its workforce to handle the influx. The Boneyard operators didn't experience COVID-19 as a crisis, they experienced it as a supercycle. Here is what an airplane graveyard actually is, once you have seen all the numbers. It is not a place where planes go to die. That framing is seductive and almost entirely wrong. The airframe, that hollow aluminum tube baking in the sun, is the least valuable thing on the property. What the Boneyard owns is a concentrated inventory of high-precision, FAA-certified components, engines, landing gear, avionics, hydraulic systems that the active global fleet needs to stay in the air. The desert is just the warehouse that happens to be cheap, corrosion-resistant, and impossible to replicate elsewhere. The business succeeds when its operators understand that every plane they receive is not an asset to be stored. It is a documentation problem to be solved, a chain of maintenance records to be verified, a set of certifications to be preserved, a pile of parts whose value lives entirely in a paper trail, stretching back to the day each component was first installed. The desert keeps the aluminum from rusting. The paperwork keeps the dollars from evaporating. Every catastrophe in commercial aviation fills the desert with planes. The Boneyard doesn't cause the catastrophe, and it doesn't cure it. It just waits, patient, dry, and extremely well-positioned, for the rest of the industry to send it work. The planes don't go to the desert to die. They go there to be worth something for one more cycle.